In March 1985, a huge aircraft carrier sailed into Chinese port, the HMAS Melbourne, an Australian aircraft carrier purchased by Guangzhou Shipyard Company. The ship was a behemoth of 14,200 tons displacement, with 40,000 horsepower under normal conditions. Moreover, the ship was supposed to have 12 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 4 3-pound guns, and 2 radars, one for air and one for sea. But when the ship sailed into China, basically all the equipment on the ship was removed, leaving only an empty shell. In other words, this aircraft carrier was sold to China as scrap iron. And China actually paid $30 million for this ship. For this, the world laughed at the Chinese for their stupidity. However, when China dismantled it, it found 2 treasures on board, which greatly exceeded the value of the scrap metal. When the Americans learned of this, they also sarcastically accused Australia of being careless. So, why did China buy a superannuated Australian aircraft carrier? What treasures did China find in this pile of scrap metal? Hi! Welcome to TechTeller. Before we start today's video, please subscribe to our channel, which is the encouragement that we can create more videos. Okay, let's move on to today's topic. First, we need to find out why Australia wants to sell this aircraft carrier. In fact, this aircraft carrier has brought glory to Australia, but at the same time, it has also brought trouble and disaster, and has been regarded as an ominous ship. So what happened on board the Melbourne? In 1949, Australia decided to purchase the British giant-class light carrier HMS Majestic and renamed her HMAS Melbourne. Upon arrival in Sydney Harbour, there was a very large welcome ceremony to celebrate the arrival of the carrier. But it was never expected that the Melbourne would bring not luck but jinx to the Australian Navy. On October 28, 1957, the Melbourne collided with the moving battleship Lankan in Adelaide Harbour. Since then, the Melbourne has collided with carriers of other countries several times and even crashed into the destroyer Voyager, causing the destroyer to be broken and sunk, killing 82 officers and men on board. Not only that, but she also suffered fire in 1972 and in 1979. The Australian Navy was so disappointed with the HMAS Melbourne that it was decommissioned in 1982. Ever since the Melbourne was brought back, it has never stopped and has always been in trouble. The casualties due to the collision have also reached 155, and the Melbourne has become the embodiment of bad luck, so many crew members are afraid to step on the deck of the Melbourne. The Australian Navy finally couldn't bear it with the Melbourne. If such an aircraft carrier is pulled out to fight, it will inevitably become the laughing stock of the enemy. Therefore, in 1982, the Australian military announced the decommissioning of the Melbourne, and the troubled aircraft carrier became a spare ship, and some injuries that had fallen before were no longer repaired. Then, why did the Chinese spend $30 million on this ominous aircraft carrier? In fact, the United States was imposing a technology embargo and an arms embargo on China at the time, and it was up to the United States to decide whether or not to sell such a major weapon as an aircraft carrier to China. But Australia wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. And the United States thought about it and agreed to sell it to China, but the hardware on the aircraft carrier needed to be completely dismantled, and no weapon systems could be left behind. So after dismantling all the equipment on it, they sold the carrier to China. However, what Australia did not expect was that China would get a fortune after dismantling the ship. The catapults and blocking devices on the carrier were not removed. And these 2 legacy technologies were precious treasure. The blocking cable is the equipment that assists the carrier's aircraft to land. Although aircraft carriers are large, they are still very short relative to the runways used for aircraft takeoff. Especially for small and light carriers, the blocking lock must be passed in order to allow the carrier aircraft to land smoothly on the deck. As for the second treasure, the catapult, as we mentioned earlier that although the carrier is large, the runway is still very short compared to the ground. And the weather on the sea is cloudy. Once encountered with bad weather, the limit of the runway distance is likely to make the aircraft cannot take off. This time the catapult plays a role. It is connected to the ship's steam turbine. Through the turbine to generate power to assist the aircraft to take off, is an important equipment to maintain the combat effectiveness of the aircraft carrier. After the study of these two technologies, many experts were greatly inspired. Actually, China did not buy the carrier to continue using it, but to study and learn about it. They could not only learn how aircraft carriers were constructed from this real carrier, but also achieve guidance to build their own aircraft carriers afterwards. They were also amazed at the Westerners' research ideas on top of aircraft carriers. The emergence of the Melbourne was like an opportunity for China to really develop carrier-related technologies independently and lay a solid foundation for the subsequent carrier construction. In fact, China has already had the idea of using catapults on aircraft carriers before, and the appearance of these two treasures immediately fills the gap in the field of such technology in China, allowing China to study at least 5 years less. So why did the Australian government dismantle all the relevant equipment when the only thing left behind was the blocking device and catapult? On the one hand, Australia believes that even if these two technologies are left to China, China will not be able to produce decent results. On the other hand, it is because the Western countries are not mature in these two technologies, so they did not deliberately put in mind. However, to the West's surprise, Chinese researchers, with their persistent efforts, eventually succeeded in obtaining relevant information and notes on the development of the aircraft carrier from the Melbourne and accumulated a large amount of precious raw data. The dismantled carrier research on the Melbourne provided China with two main helps. One was that the dismantling process allowed China to recognize how carriers were built and helped Chinese naval designers to be able to successfully sketch the design of the carriers. The other was that the Melbourne's carrier deck was still intact and could help China's pilots practice carrier takeoffs and landings. And after China studied the Melbourne, it also found a surprise. It was that the Melbourne could only travel at an angle. It turns out that before the aircraft carrier Melbourne was decommissioned in 1982, it had become a large ship that could not drive upright and straight. After experts' research, they found the root cause of the Melbourne slanting. The navigational gyrofoil inside the Melbourne's hull had been welded 15 degrees to the right. Nowadays, China has 3 aircraft carriers, the Liaoning, Shandong, and Fujian. The Shandong ship, in particular, was designed and built by the Chinese themselves, and its core technologies were all developed by China itself. This 100% domestic aircraft carrier is the result of decades of hard work and research by Chinese researchers and naval officers. Of course, in this process, China's learning from other countries is also essential. The ill-fated Melbourne is perhaps one of China's teachers, too. Okay, that's all for today. Please put your comments below and share your insightful ideas. Please keep following our channel and like our videos. I am Tech Teller, the person to tell you the opinions that worth spreading every day. Thank you so much for your continuous support. Your precious time with us is highly appreciated. See you.